Can you hear me?
Hey, what's up?
Hey, what's up? Sorry about that. I honestly have no idea what I'm doing on here, so it took me a minute.
No, you're good. Let me see if I can connect to Wi-Fi because it looks like my connection might be a little unstable.
All right.
Okay, let's see if that works out better.
I can hear you fine now. You good? You connected?
Yes, sir, I am.
All right. Well, first, you know what? I just realized I don't even have your name. What was your first name?
Phil.
Phil. Okay. All right.
hmm
And I'm Jake,
Nice to officially meet you, I suppose.
by the way. Nice to officially meet you. All right. Um. Well, yeah. And I mean, I couldn't figure out how to get it all, you know, differently set up. So at the end, if it, I think it records it here, so I might upload it. I've got a YouTube page, but just kind of wanted to go over it. Like I said, it's not. Uh, I didn't want it to be like a conflict sort of thing, but sit down and kind of go through it together and kind of get
Mhm.
your thoughts, what your view on it, and hopefully, the biblical view, so we can kind of go through it together. Because I know a lot of people have questions the same way that I do, and have had on this subject. But just starting at that T with the tulip here on the Calvinism side, the total depravity aspect, and a lot of times I see that Romans 3 is quoted there. So,
Mhm.
and I don't know. I mean, I can start out, or you can start out here, and we can. I went through basically Romans 1 through 8. We can kind of offshoot from there if you want, and kind of spend some time in Romans 3. 10 through 18. Those verses are quoted a lot.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good to me. Um, did you want to start in Romans 1 or just jump straight to chapter 3?
We can start in chapter 3 and then kind of work backwards if you want.
Okay.
So,
I'm not sure if you hear an echo, by the way. I'm kind of in a echoey room.
it's not bad. I mean, I can
Okay.
hear the background with the room there, but it's nothing crazy, so you're okay.
Okay.
So, to my spot here. All right. And you want to start it out, or you want me
You can start out.
to? Okay. All right. So, uh, my notes here. A lot of time I read the Legacy Standard Bible, but I've got my notes
Oh,
through one
awesome.
of those spiral Bibles, so it's an ESV version. Just so I
hmm
had some more notes to take on the side. So I'll start out here. 10, I'll just read 10 through 18, and then we can go back through it together there. So, uh, as it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks for God. All have turned aside, together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave. They use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asp is under their lips. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. In their paths are ruin and misery. And the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. So that right there, I mean, if you went to YouTube and typed it in, you'd see 50,000 different versions of people telling you that that is total depravity. There it is, right there, cut and dry.
hmm
Um,
Yeah.
but I think the problem with that, and is when you look at what Paul is quoting here, is Psalms 14 and 53 there. So
hmm
Psalms 14, 1 through 7. I mean, both of those verses start out. Um, Pull my other Bible up here. I got to get more prepared here. The wicked fool says in his heart. I mean, to me, I mean, these verses he's quoting, he's talking about the wicked fool. Psalms seems to be, that Psalm seems to be talking about the difference between the wicked fool and those that are good, essentially. So the wicked
hmm
fool says in his heart, there is no God. They act corruptly. They commit abominable deeds. There is none. There is no one who does good. Yahweh looks down from heaven upon the sons of men to see if there is anyone who has insight, anyone who seeks after God. They have all turned aside. Altogether, they have become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. So I would say the antecedent there in Romans 14 would be the wicked fool.
Well, I think that's a correct antecedent for Psalm 40, or excuse me, Psalm 14. I think Paul's application of it in Romans, though, is both Jew and Greek, because verse 9, what then? Are we better? Are we better than they? Not at all. For we have already changed or charged that both Jews and Greeks are all under sin. So to me, Paul's application and point of the quotations in verses 3 through 18 seems to be the condemnation that all, independent of Jew or Gentile, are under sin, and this is what being under sin necessarily looks like.
I gotcha. I gotcha. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying there, and I know that that is the context here. We're talking Jews and Greeks, but my problem with then saying, well, now this is pointing to total depravity, would be that it's almost as if Paul is misapplying it. I know that that's not what you're saying, but it's almost to say,
Mm-hmm.
well, this is what the application was in Psalm 14, but Paul is quoting it directly for a different application. Just it seems like it sort of changes the meaning of it in that context.
Well, I think oftentimes in Scripture we see the apostles do this. They'll take a text from the Tanakh and they'll make it in reference to Jesus. Or, for example, in John chapter 12, when Isaiah has his temple vision, Isaiah says, "My eyes have seen the glory of the King, Yahweh of hosts." John says Isaiah saw Jesus' glory, and so presumably people in the Old Testament thought maybe that was the Father. John applies it to Jesus, and we see this especially through Paul as well. So I think that the application of Old Testament texts in the New Testament, if it's going to be done, and if it's going to have a different application than an apostle, somebody who has been commissioned by Jesus to preach the gospel, is somebody to do that.
I got you. I mean that makes sense. Like I said, I just and I think the tricky part here too is that when you, like I said, if you went on YouTube and looked it up, there would be no context given to those verses in Psalm. So to me, I mean, it's
Yeah.
not mis a misuse of it's not maybe the right word, but it almost feels like a misuse of it when it's like there's no credence given to it. It's like this is the quote and this is what it means specifically. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oftentimes people have um, a drive to place their theological perspectives onto the text without actually drawing it from the text, especially when you have people on YouTube and stuff like that. But I think that there is good reasons to think that Paul is talking about the natural condition of everybody, both Jew and Greek, because he's giving an explication of what it means to be under sin. If we are all under sin, he's negating the idea that Jews are better than Gentiles. And since we're all under sin, the quotation from 10 through 18 applies to everybody. So not just, well, and I guess from the Reform perspective, if that applies to everybody, then we should say that in Psalm 14, everybody is at one point the fool who says, "In his heart there is no God." Hence the total depraved.
I got you. Okay. All right. Well, then let's. I guess let's start in Romans 1.
Okay.
And see kind of if that aligns. Like, out of Romans 1 and 2, and then we get to 3, is that the context that we're given? Because, I mean, obviously, if it flows in that direction, then you get to 3, 10 through
Mm-hmm.
18, and it aligns with the first two chapters, then I think that that's kind of the credence you have to give it. That's what it means. That's the application. So, um,
Yeah, I agree.
so let's see. I've got some notes on it. I mean, like if out of the two of us, you'd have to be the scholar here. So just throwing that out there. But just kind of looking through it together. So that's why I think, like I said, I think it's a good conversation to have to be able to sort of see it from both sides. Because oftentimes,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you just typed it in Google, there's going to be 15 different articles about why total depravity is this and why it isn't. There's never this is sort of the middle ground. This is what this side is saying. This is what this side is saying. This is the reason why
Mm-hmm.
this is the truth. So there's an agenda on both
Yeah,
sides sometimes, I think.
yeah, and it's always good to have that balance of each side being presented and allowing the audience or the viewers to decide for themselves based upon whatever each side presents.
Yeah, and I think we would both agree that the Bible does not misrepresent itself. It does not mistranslate itself. So, I mean, if this all flows from this direction, then that is the direction that it is. So,
Right.
all right. So I've got a few verses picked out here from one, and then we can go back through them here. So, let's see. The problem with these spiral Bibles is they're so obnoxiously big and in the way. So verse 119 is the first one I highlighted there. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown to them, or God has shown it to them. Sorry. So
Hmm.
when I read that, I mean, we're looking at obviously sort of to set the boundaries of it is the total depravity isn't meaning utter depravity. It's not that no one can ever do anything good. It's that they have an inability to seek after God because of the blindness might not be the right word, but that fall from Adam, that the sin on man's heart. Is that kind of an accurate depiction of that, or how would you describe it
Well, the video feed cut out a little bit on my end, so I didn't hear all of what you said.
Oh, no, I was just saying, like, to be fair to the total depravity aspect of it, it's not saying utter depravity, right? So it's not saying that man has no ability to ever do anything good. It's just that man's depravity
Right.
keeps them from being able to seek after God. I mean, is that sort of a
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, I would say that's a more accurate representation. A lot of times, people substitute the term depravity with inability.
Hmm.
So the reform perspective is not saying that people are as bad as they could possibly be. And in fact, we see oftentimes there are atheists who seem to be towards us very good and moral people. But the doctrine essentially posits that there are certain innate characteristics or dispositions of the human condition resulting from sin, which necessarily precludes us from wanting or desiring to come to God.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And I just wanted to make sure because I said I talked to other people who've had different definitions of it, but I think that to be fair to the point that you're coming from, the same way I would hope that my side would be represented from that. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure exactly what my side falls into because I've looked into some of the Wesleyan Arminianism, and I'm not sure that I'm on
Mm-hmm.
board with uh, with all of those doctrines either. So just trying to figure out exactly what the Bible says in line with that. So going back to 119 there, to me, I mean, it aligns with like when we read like Genesis 3:22, where God said that man now has the knowledge of good and evil, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
119 is telling us that what is known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, the evidence of God is there. It's plain. Verse 20 tells us, for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world. So I would say from the reform side of it, how would you look at that verse where it to me says, hey, we all have the ability to see God. We have the knowledge that he's there. Um, and then I guess I would say it's almost like, but then the choice of not choosing God. But
Mm-hmm.
how would you look at
Well, from the reform perspective, and I think maybe not even just solely from the reform perspective, but there are some non-reform positions that I think would agree on this point as well. But the way that the reform perspective understands this is essentially by understanding the flow from 18 into 19. Because if you look at verse 18, it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." And in the original language, katekton is a active participle, so it's an active verb. They are presently pressing down. It kind of Paul kind of uses the illustration there with the verb of a ball that's in a pool and it's floating up to the surface, and they are actively pushing it back down in rebellion, in sin, and in unrighteousness. And so that stands in contrast to them knowing about God. And so, although God has revealed it to them, they necessarily, because of unrighteousness, because of the state of their fallenness, they suppress that truth.
it? Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, and I've got the note there as well. I translated it holding back the truth that they have or that they know. So present
Yeah,
tense.
you could say holding back, restraining, detaining, that sort of thing.
Okay. Sorry, my 316 prayer alarm went off. Sorry about that. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, I see that. So I mean, starting at 18 versus jumping to 19. So let me reread that again. See if I've got any notes. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who, by their unrighteousness, suppress the truth. So you would say that the unrighteousness of men is causing the suppression of the truth.
Yeah, I would take that to be kind of the means through which the suppression takes place.
Okay. Let me make a note on that.
Some translations, I think you just read. Did you read from the ESV?
Yeah, I read the ESV.
Or is it? Yeah, so the ESV says, by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. The NASB says, in unrighteousness they suppress the truth. So either it's the means or it's the sphere in which it takes place. But I think the means is an accurate translation.
Okay. All right. Let's see. I'm going to make a note of that because I didn't catch that one before. I guess I had skipped over it a little bit. Because I mean, it would flow 18, 19, then 20. If it's answered by 18, then that would be the answer there. So let me come back to that one. I made a note of
Okay.
that as well. So let's see. If we go 20 to 21, for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So if they're, I guess that question would be then if they knew God, right, and they are without excuse because they knew God,
Mm-hmm.
if see, I'm trying to bring it back to 18 as well. Unrighteousness, unrighteousness, suppress the truth. So I mean, if they knew God, then how is it an act to suppress the truth if they already know God, which they would know the truth of God by His invisible attributes?
Well, I think there's a distinction that can be made between knowing who God is, recognizing that He's the creator, but then subsequently rejecting that revelation and saying, no, I'm not going to honor you as God. And I think Paul's point is that that's exactly what we see happening. And the rejection of Him, the rejection of the evidence that He has given people in creation necessarily results in them not being able to have an excuse. Anapologetus in Greek is the negation of apologia, or apologetics, if you've heard of that.
Yeah.
And apologia is essentially technical term that involves using evidence, and in the Hellenistic Greek world was kind of a courtroom term, and so they are without a reasoned defense. In other words, because of the fact that God has plainly made evident His attributes in creation, and they willingly rejected that. Um,
But I guess then, if they willingly rejected that, then
now,
they can see it. What? Sorry.
I'm sorry, the feed again. I was saying I think there's just a distinction between knowing God and accepting Him, if that makes sense.
Okay. But if they
Let's see.
knew God, then would it be a willing act of not accepting, or would the fact that in 18 that the righteousness is suppressing the truth, would that cause them to not even know that they are not accepting? If that makes sense. Oh, are you there? Sorry, I didn't realize you're.
I'm not sure if text explicitly give that amount of detail. I think it just simply says that
You're breaking up pretty bad.
results in. Okay,
Oh,
let me
oh,
see if I can try
you
to.
might be good now. Let's see.
Is that better?
I can hear you. I can hear you now.
Okay. The Wi-Fi keeps connecting and disconnecting, so I apologize for that.
You're fine.
Um, but yeah, I think the suppression, again, it's an active thing that happens, and it's resulting from the unrighteousness. But I think that the question is where does the unrighteousness come from? And the Reform's perspective is, well, that's something that's innate because of the fall of Adam.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm just rereading it. Sorry. I guess that's what's not squaring with me on that one. Then, I'm asking the same question, trying to figure it out. But
Mm-hmm.
if they're rejecting God even though they knew God, right? Then how do they know God if the truth of God has been suppressed? I mean, that's kind of because would I would say that if you know God, you would know the truth, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
again, I mean, it's kind of asking the same question, but I'm just trying to make that make sense with it because I would say that I mean, in the depraved state, you would not even be able to know God because you are in that state of lostness.
Well, I think at times that can be the case. Some people can be self-deceived to the point to where they might reject that which God has revealed to them. And I think we see that a lot. But I think what Paul's point in the text here is the NASB has it in a concessive form. They say, "For although they knew God, they didn't honor him as God or give thanks to him, but became futile in their speculations, and their foolish hearts were darkened." So although they knew God, they still acted in opposition to him. And I think that acting in opposition is the same thing as what Paul is talking about in verse 18 of suppressing. So the act of suppressing is not honoring God or giving thanks to him.
Okay. Okay. I said I'm making notes as well because some of this stuff I'll go back over and rewatch this as well. Um, let's see. And then 22, claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and things. Therefore, God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the Creator or the creature rather than the Creator who is blessed forever. So they exchanged the truth, although they knew God. I'm gonna go back through that later because it just to me I'm not understanding. Like 18, that makes sense. Explain it into the 19 and 20, and then we go here and it's talking about exchanging the knowledge that they already have. It's just not making sense to me from that context.
Well, again, I think the distinction that I would make is just because they have a knowledge of who God is doesn't mean that they act in light of that. And Paul's point is that they haven't acted in light of that. Um, I think it would be akin to the same point that's made elsewhere in Scripture, where I think in James, where even the demons believe that there's a true God.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that just that their knowledge or even evidence that's been given to them that God exists results necessarily in them honoring God and giving thanks to Him.
Gotcha. Okay. So, I mean, I guess some of that's kind of picked up in verse 28. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do
Mm-hmm.
what ought not to be done. Okay. So the total depravity from that aspect is not saying that there's no ability to know God, but there's no ability to seek after Him in righteousness. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think that the total inability would present the idea that God has revealed Himself, but because of sin, we necessarily reject that, and therefore it has to one has to have a transformed heart through the ministerial work of the Spirit, through the call of and proclamation of the gospel, to change one's nature and disposition so as to allow them to seek after God.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Um, that's notes I had on one. Is there anything else on one that you had that you want to go over?
I don't think so. No.
Like I said, some of this I'm just trying to kind of piece it together, learned it on the fly. I've got notes and stuff, but just sort of figure out both sides of it. So let's see. So if we go to chapter 2, then um, 1 through 2, therefore you have no excuse, O man, every one of you who judges, for in passing judgment on another you condemn yourselves, because you, the judge, practice the very same things. We know that the judgment of God rightly falls on those who practice such things. So the judgment of God on the people who practice sin, who condemn other people because they're sinning themselves. Yep, no problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Notes are. I mean, in the note I have, and I'm assuming I know your answer for that, would be that that is calling out man's actions in the sin, not their inability not to sin. But I'm assuming, I mean, I guess you would look at it as that's not a problem. It's still the inability to seek after righteousness. God's still going to judge people for their sins at the end, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Paul is transitioning here, kind of in his flow of thought between the acts of impurity and the acts of all of the uh, impure things. I'm not sure how TikTok monitors the language, but all of the impure things that Paul is listing out
Yep.
from 19 kind of and beyond, he's responding to people who perhaps are in the Roman congregation who have judged these things, yet still either do them themselves or have done them in the past. And so that's why he says, therefore, you have no excuse, every one of you who passes judgment. For in that which you judge another, you condemn yourself. For you who judge practice these same things. So it's a charge against hypocrisy. But I'm not sure if total inability is kind of the view as far as the beginning of Romans 2 goes. I don't think it would address the issue.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're saying it more aligns with Jesus' teaching to remove the log from your eye, but put the speck in your brother's eye.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. Let's see. 2, 5 through 6. Find my place here. But because of your hard and impenitent heart, you are storing up wrath for yourselves in the day of wrath when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. He will render to each one according to his works. Let's see. So I guess the other question would be then, under the fall, um, or after the fall, being that sin imputed from Adam there from that perspective, would it be that every man is judged by Adam's sin and then individually for their own, or we're all under the sin because of, or all in sin because of Adam's sin, all judged individually for our own sins? If that makes sense.
I think there's differences in the reform perspective on some of these things. I would say that the main consensus is that we are under guilt because of Adam's headship. He was the first representative of the human race, and hence his sin is extended to us through our nature and by way of our guilt before God. And then on top of that, we willfully sin in result of that, which is also held accountable to us.
So 5 and 6, when it's talking about the individual deeds that were being punished for our individual actions, I mean, even if you held to that perspective, you wouldn't probably look at that as being an issue that it's not mentioning that from Adam. It's still saying that we're all accountable for our own actions. Then in that case,
Yeah, I would say that Paul at this point he's not really addressing any the idea of total depravity or the inability of man because of Adam or anything like that. I think he's addressing hypocrisy and the result of sin in light of individuals breaking specifically the Torah.
gotcha. Okay, and that makes sense. I mean, like I said, reading back into it, if I read, if I look up certain maybe hardcore Calvinist on this topic, they would say 100% this, 100% that, and then you go, well, it doesn't mention it here. So it's just everybody has a different view on what it should say, and that's why I'm asking about what it does say in the application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
Um,
always a good place to start. Is what does the text say before what does that mean?
yeah. So I guess, and the other part would be let's look at the text and then figure out why this makes sense, not presuppose it and add it to it in the beginning. So, which I think is an issue for a lot of people. So in every walk of life, I think. So, let's see. And then 2:14, I've got another note here. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. So the law judges by the law, not the knowledge of the law, but the deeds under it. Was the note I've got on there. So I mean, Paul's describing nature, um, not as the sin, right? He's but the knowledge of the good and the evil, I guess, the knowledge of what the law requires there. And I guess and I guess most of these questions, some of these questions I had written down, and it was more or less for a hardcore 100% taking this line stance. So I'm glad that's not that conversation we're having. So I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
can square those away with what you're saying as well. So I've got no problem with those. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I mean that's all the notes I had in two. I mean, do you have anything else to add on two there before we jump into three
Um,
again?
I read through the 1, 2, and 3 earlier today before hopping on here, and like I said, I think that Paul's point leads into his condemnation of everybody. But right now, I think he's setting that up, kind of in a specific to potentially what's happening in Rome. Then he's targeting certain um, Jews that have a boastful spirit about themselves because of the fact that they're Jews, and so he's responding to that, going from 2 into 3. Mind you, the chapters and verse constructions are kind of arbitrary. Most of those didn't. They certainly didn't exist when Paul wrote Romans, and they didn't exist in the history of the church all the way for about 1,500 years as we have them in our Bibles today. And so the flow of thought transitions to, well, a Jew thinks he's better simply because he's a Jew. Well, that actually doesn't have any effect because of the fact that we're all under sin. And so that's where I think he goes into a basis for the doctrine of total depravity is because we are all under sin, and this is what that looks like, then therefore we can't come to God based upon what that looks like.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Yeah. No, and that makes sense. You know, and that's the other part is, reading in it, like reading one, and if I go to a YouTube video or a commentary, and it's like, this is how to defeat Calvinism within this, and it's like all of it is
Mm-hmm.
presupposing the fact that Calvinism is wrong, and go to the other side, and it's all presupposing that it's right, and it's like 100% this way, 100% that way. So it's just that's a lot of the questions, a lot of the notes that I've got down are like, well, if he comes on here and he's extreme on the
Mm-hmm.
right side of this, this is how to go. So that's
Yeah,
it's
which I mean, I am convicted. I do think that's what the text
mm-hmm,
is supporting. Now, I don't think the full fledged doctrine is um, right there in verses 10 through 18. I think that's a strong support for the natural disposition of man. But the other parts, the soteriological implications of that, I think aren't addressed in this particular set of verses.
mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Let me see. Moving past 1 and 2, and I just trying to see if I've got anything in 3 here because I've got some questions on 4 for you. But you said it.
Okay.
I mean, do you care if we go into 4? I know you said you read 1, 2, and 3. So
Yeah, we can go into 4.
okay, all right, and nothing too hard, just sort of the application of it there. So let's see. Verse 22, Paul starts to expound on the righteousness of God and grace to all sinners. Which again, that was the interesting thought for me to kind of figure that out because um, understanding the difference between the imputation of Adam's sin to all man plus all man's sin is kind of a weird concept of that, I guess, or at least for me it was. It took a minute to kind of to figure that out, I guess. Let me see, verse 22 I have highlighted. Find it. The righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. There is no distinction. Or there is no distinction.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm assuming, so I mean, based on that, I guess the way I would look at it, I mean, would be, or the way that I've generally looked at it, is that all who believe are the people who acknowledge God, like that have faith, right? That that see the invisible attributes of God and choose God. The total depravity aspect says that that is impossible to that point to come on to or to come to on our own. So that's the interesting thought on that. And then
Yeah, I
I mean,
think I think I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I think in 322 what's happening is kind of a similar case to what we see in oddly enough John 3:16. Pistou santos is another present active participle, and so the rendering could be even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all those who are believing. It's acting substantively, talking about individuals, or in Greek a substantive, and then the pantos meaning the inclusive all those who are believing, and same thing with John 3:16. I don't see this as mentioning ability, so I don't think it's talking about whether somebody has the ability to believe or whether they don't. It's simply stating that the righteousness of God is given to those who do believe. and there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
Okay. But that makes sense. I mean, and I had looked at the John 3:16 verse as well and seen you can get into some places where people argue about that, but I do see the original intention of that. So you're saying that that's the same for all who have believed. It would be more of an active who are believing currently in this moment.
Yeah, well, I would just the grammar of the word, the lexeme there, pistuantos, is a present active participle. So typically in English, present active participles are translate or are ing words. So he is running would be like a present active participle. And so in this text, all those who are believing in Jesus Christ is how you could translate it.
I got you. Okay, no, that makes sense. Well, then the next question I have for you then would be, going to Romans 4 there. Um, I mean, when we get into Abraham's faith being counted, or his it being counted as righteousness, the faith that Abraham had, how would that work in the context that, I mean, all mankind would be totally depraved? How would Abraham then have enough faith that it would be counted as righteousness in this context? I guess I don't understand the context of how it's applied there.
Well, the Reform perspective would be that Abraham's faith was resulting from the way that everybody gets faith, and that's because Abraham was chosen by God. He was given a disposition, a new heart, and the ability, in essence, to place faith in God, and then that faith resulted, as we see here, in righteousness being accredited to him.
Okay. And then, I mean, when we look at like Old Testament examples here, like when we go through like Abel, like Jesus says that the blood of Abel is righteous in Matthew 23:35. I mean, is that the same context that it's because of that, you know, granting from God that he is able to be righteous in this context?
Yeah, from the Reformed paradigm, that's how we would understand it. But again, that's kind of looking backwards from the theological perspective back onto those different texts. And I don't think those specific texts are dealing with the issue. I think Paul is not necessarily in Romans chapter 4 talking about or answering the question, well, if everybody is depraved, then how could Abraham have faith enough to give him to credit him righteousness? I don't think he's answering that question. But from the Reform perspective, that's how we would understand it, already having a full-fledged systematic theology.
I got you. Okay. Yeah, and I didn't mean to reapply that into Romans,
Yeah.
but based on that understanding of the total depravity, how it
Mm-hmm.
would then apply itself, backwards
Mm-hmm.
into that.
Yeah, and this is kind of the interesting thing about with the systematic and walking through a particular text, because no one systematic theology is represented by walking through dogmatically one specific text, because the purpose of a systematic theology is to combine concepts from all over Scripture and synthesize them and harmonize them to come up with, this is what the entirety of Scripture is saying on this topic. And some systematic theologians would say, well, that, and then including outside sources like creeds and confessions and stuff like that, to make a distinction between systematic theology and biblical theology. But in any case, yeah, just walking through the text of Romans 1 through 3, I think there's principles, and there's certain texts which give clarity to the fallenness of man, which can be then extrapolated out to build the systematic. I don't think just simply walking through Romans 1 through 4, you're going to come up with tulip, or something like that.
Yeah. No, and that makes sense. And I'm glad you said it that way. Um, because there's so many different things where it's like, and there it is. That's the concept of total depravity. That's the doctrine, Romans 3:10 through 18, right there.
Mm-hmm.
So, understanding in that way does make sense. And I appreciate that because looking at it from that side, now I've got some stuff to go back and look over it as well. Um, can I ask you one more question here that kind of
Sure.
it's maybe it's a little bit left field here, but if we look at Acts with like Cornelius, right? It says that
Mm-hmm.
he is, righteous. His whole house is righteous, right? I mean, and that was before Peter brought the gospel. I mean, is that same concept that he was granted that righteousness from God, that ability to seek after God in this context? I mean,
Well, I would have to look at the context there in Acts, but there's certain instances in Scripture where the term righteous can be used in a human context, where from a human perspective, people are seen as righteous. I don't know if that's what's going on with Acts. I'd have to look at it again, but from
I
the
actually
Reformed
misquoted that. I apologize. It says that he was a devout man and feared God. Sorry.
yeah. Yeah, so a devout man who feared God in the Reformed paradigm, that would necessarily be resulting from the grace of God being given to him to allow him to fear God in that aspect.
Okay, that was it. Like I said, nothing, no
Yeah,
gotcha to it. I just wanted to see
yeah.
how that would align with
And the book of Acts is a kind of a unique um, period in history too, because we have a history of the overlapping of the covenants, and so the initiation of the gospel, the proclamation of the gospel, the word about what Christ has done, who He is, and everything that's involved with that is now being spread to the world after Pentecost and stuff like that, and so we have this kind of overlapping period that is pretty unique. So I don't know if Reform systematic theologians base any one doctrine necessarily in from the Book of Acts, other than maybe there's places I think in Acts 3 and 4 where predestination comes into to hand or comes into to discussion. But as far as total depravity goes, I don't think anybody establishes that from the Book of Acts. I think there's allusions to it, but again, that's kind of looking back from a systematic onto the text.
I got you. No, and I didn't see any defenses of it from that side either. That was actually just something in my own reading, kind of figure that out. So, I mean, so was Cornelius granted his righteousness in the old covenant or the new
Presumably the new covenant, because
covenant? I'm just kidding, by the way.
yeah. But I mean, either way, though, I think a covenantalist or a covenantal theologian would say that either way, whether it was the old covenant or the new covenant, it was still given by the same means.
Yeah,
So all the Old Testament saints, they were saved because of faith. New Testament saints were saved because of faith.
yeah, yeah. I would walk with you there to say the providence of God is great in either covenant. It doesn't matter which one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So okay. Well, that was. I mean, that was it. Those are the questions I had, just kind of walking through there. I appreciate you being, you know, a good conversationalist on it because, like I said, I didn't want it to be like a dogmatic. This is what it says, but more of this is what the Bible says. How can we understand it from this perspective? So I've got some stuff to reread back over there. I'll shoot you another message. But if there's another time that works, maybe we could run through some unconditional election aspects of
Yeah,
the
sure.
Bible before it.
Yeah, that gets into more fun because there you have more text that can be established, and not that there aren't for total depravity, but there are certain key texts that Calvinists and Reformed theologians like to go to with that. So
I'm going to clip
that's
you
always a
saying
good
that and
time.
make it look like you said that there weren't.
Oh yeah, okay.
Just kidding. No, yeah. I mean, I'll shoot you a message on that. I mean, I enjoyed this conversation. I have exegeted John 6 though, so there's another way to look at it. So we can go
Yeah, sure. I'd love to do a exegesis on John 6.
through. So, all right, don't use any big words for me, okay?
Yeah, appreciate
All right,
it.
thanks, man.
All right, see you.